Thanks for joining me again with Teaching Through the Bible. As we continue looking through Exodus, we've already seen God take the people of Israel from their slavery in Egypt, bring them out of that land, save them from that, and now we're seeing what they are to do. Now they have already been saved from that evil, from the slavery to the Egyptians. Now, what is it that God calls them to do? He says, here's what I have already done, and here's what I expect you to do. They've made a covenant already. They've made a covenant between God and between his people, with Moses as that guy in between. And so now, what are they supposed to do? They're supposed to build some things. They're supposed to follow some instructions. There's a lot of different details on this, a lot of chapters on this. We're kind of going through it all. And we've already looked at some of the case laws, because we talked about there's kind of three different types of, you could say, instructions. When God commands them, he gives them moral law. That's like what we call the Ten Commandments. He gives them civil law, which is taking that moral law and saying, how does this apply specifically to our context, our society? And then there's ceremonial law that points us to Jesus in a way that is very, I'd say, is very clear comparatively. So everything can point us to Jesus. We see our need for him through not following the moral law all the way, through not being successful in what we're called to do in these things. But with the ceremonial law, then we see these pictures, we see these patterns that give us a glimpse into more of who Jesus is. And so we've got in these, we have part of that is going to be the building of the tabernacle. So the tabernacle, it's a tent. So Moses had this tent of meeting, as he called it, that was outside of the camp. This was just a tent that he set up, and that's where he met with God. But God is now saying it's time to make this tabernacle, this tent that's going to be in the midst of the people. And it's going to be where not just Moses goes. Moses isn't going to be going there. It's going to be the priests once the whole priesthood is set up. So you've got that. And we have chapter after chapter describing this. So we're going to spend a couple lessons just looking through all these different things that are most of the rest of the book, honestly. Just all these things that are going to be built. And they're going to be built in a lot of detail according to this. It's not just, hey, go build me a table. Hey, go build me a lamp. It's not generic. It's this specific thing in this specific way. Even the materials. And you'll notice, if you're paying attention to what materials are made, then there's a pattern to it. We have right here, this is a really rough diagram of the temple, as it would be. It's not the temple that Solomon made. It's not a permanent thing. It's the tabernacle, but this is essentially kind of a pre-temple, the temple before they had one. After this, this gets replaced by the temple. And after that's destroyed, there's another temple that's built. So this all these things, the original tent of meeting with Moses, this tabernacle, Solomon's temple, Herod's temple, all these things are supposed to be the places where God's people meet with God, where he dwells, where he's present. And so here, this tabernacle, it's a very general diagram. It is, it's not. Don't think that you should take this one as far as exactly where each thing is. It's general. If you want a more specific and as far as distance-wise and size-wise and accurate, then there are Bibles that will have this in there. The Archaeology Study Bible, ESV, I know that has that in there. Also, there's one by John Currid that is ESV Bible Atlas. I put a link in there for the ESV Bible Atlas below in the comments, or in the description below. but these things can give you more details. You can probably just Google it too, although, again, you may have something that's a little less accurate, but there are definitely people who have taken the time to really reconstruct that as accurately as possible. For these purposes, for what we're doing here, this is fine. But so this right here, this tabernacle, as we look through the different items here, we'll notice that, like, in this place here, this is the actual tent. And then the boundaries, this is all open air. This is not closed up. And the boundaries out here, this stuff, if you look at the material there versus the material here, it's going to be different. In here, in the tent, it's made of gold. And the further out you get, then there's some things are made of silver. Right there, that's going to be that's the altar where you sacrifice the animals. That's going to be made of bronze. So you're going from the things closest to God, which would be the Holy of Holies. This area here. That's going to be the part where, like, God most clearly lives, where His presence is supposed to be. That the further away you get from that, then gold to silver to bronze. There's kind of there's levels of it, and that's supposed to be communicating something. And if we are looking in details, then we notice these things. Which things are gold and which things are made of silver and which things are made of bronze, and which things have what do they have on them. You see, pomegranates are a part of the decorations. Cherubs, part of the decorations. The lampstand is supposed to look kind of like a tree. This all shows imagery of a garden. That's kind of interesting. Why would that be? Well, there's actually a lot of different ancient Near East cultures had kind of a theme of a garden in their worship sites, theme of nature in their worship sites. And I really think one reason for that is because the original worship site was the Garden of Eden. And so while other religions, they get a lot of it wrong, but that doesn't mean that they have to get 100% of it wrong. And maybe they have that kind of like tied back in there, and that's continued along, where they still kind of have that theme, even though they've switched out a lot of the important details. They're not even worshiping the true God anymore, but they have an idea that that there was this Garden of Eden, this perfect place where people and God were together, and they're trying to recreate that. Certainly, I think that's the case here, where when we get to the temple with King Solomon, there's even more imagery of a garden. So this is supposed to be reminding us of the Garden of Eden, even the cherubs. Who's supposed to be guarding the Garden of Eden? When God kicks out Adam and Eve, then he places cherubs at the entrance so that the garden is protected. And so we've got the cherubs there. We've got pomegranates, which was a type of fruit they had there. And so we have this theme of garden, and it's bringing us back to the Garden of Eden. It's where we need to be, right? We need to be in this place where there is no sin, this place where people can be with God. We had that place in Genesis 1 and 2 and lost it. And so this is kind of a reference there, and that's kind of a general, broad overview of the tabernacle. But let's look at the details of the tabernacle. Let's look at this, the specific things there. We'll start out with where Exodus starts out, right here. Now the little red rectangles, those are all, and the little red circle, those are all just these different, I guess you could say it's different furniture. So the one in the what's called Holy of Holies is just the Ark of the Covenant. That is the only thing in that room. And there's a curtain there that separates that room from the larger room in the tabernacle. Now, we see that the Ark of the Covenant, as we read through the Bible, this is clearly something that represents God's special presence. The Israelites were encouraged when it was leading them in battle or something, wherever they were going. If they had the Ark of the Covenant with them, they were, it got to a point of superstition, honestly, but they were encouraged when they had that with them because this was supposed to represent God's presence. And then when it was taken away from them, it was a disaster. When they didn't have it with them, it was a disaster. So this is particularly supposed to be where God lives. And of course, God is everywhere, but in a really special way, here is where he's making his home. And so this room was barely even accessible to anyone else. God said this is his place, and basically no one else is allowed to go in there. And that is because God is holy and we are not holy. And because we're not holy, we cannot be in his presence. And that's why we have this. We have a whole system separating people away from God. He's actually, the tabernacle is significantly in the middle of the people of Israel. As they make a camp, they camp around it. But even though it's in there, there's all these barriers of separation. So he is with his people, and that's amazing and important. And we see that even in names. Like we talked about how Yahweh is his promise to be with us. Later on in Isaiah, we're going to see the name Emmanuel, which is literally God with us. So he is with us, and yet at the same time, there's this separation, there's this barrier. And that's a problem, and that's why the priests are needed. And the only time you could have anyone go in to the most holy place, the Holy of Holies, was one time a year at the Day of Atonement. Only the high priest could go in there. Only the high priest was allowed in there, and only one time a year. And we'll look more at that when we get about midway through Leviticus. But that is just this barrier that we have because God is so holy and we are so not. And so you have this one guy who could be there. And so that's the Ark of the Covenant. That is symbolic of God's presence with us. Of course, his greatest presence with us comes when Jesus shows up in human form. He's flesh and blood, a human being. He's taken on a human body. And he is so truly with his people in just a very different kind of a way. And we didn't have that back here when the Ark of the Covenant, people may be able to see it as they're traveling and stuff, but then the tent gets set up, the Ark of the Covenant goes in there, and they could not go into that place. And so there was this barrier that is broken down when Jesus comes. And in fact, the veil right here, this curtain, that they had a veil also in the temple in Jesus' day. And it says in the Gospels that when Jesus died, that veil was torn, ripped up. Like it literally, the veil was torn. Not that somebody went there and tore it, but that it just ripped. Not someone doing it, but it just ripping. And, of course, showing us this access that we now have to God because of Jesus' sacrifice. And so that veil there, that curtain that's blocking it off from the rest of the tabernacle, the special significance of the Ark of the Covenant as God's presence that's being held behind that, that all was pointing us to Jesus and what he's going to do when he comes to allow us to have access to him in a very special way. Because of him dying for us, then we now have access in a way that they didn't have back then. And that's something that they could still believe in going forward, right? They know about this seed of the woman that's going to come and fix everything. And in fact, that's actually a question a lot of people ask about, like, how is it that people in the Old Testament were saved. Well, they were saved the same way as in the New Testament. They believed in the one that was going to fix everything, right? So we believe in the one who came to pay the punishment for our sins, to fix our problem. And the Old Testament, they believed the same thing. They just didn't have all the details. They just didn't know who exactly was that going to be. Who is this seed of the woman that's going to come fix everything? We don't know who it is, but we're going to trust God that that person is going to fix the problem. And so essentially they were saved in the same way with less details. But so we're going to wrap it up there for our beginning into looking at this whole thing with the tabernacle. And next time we'll continue looking at a lot of other parts that were built and put into this project. Thank you for watching that video. I hope that it helped you learn a little bit more about the Bible today. And if you'd like to continue to learn more about the Bible, then we have plenty of other videos on the channel. And if this has been helpful for you, then you can always let me know by subscribing to the channel. And hopefully I'll be able to continue to help you learn even more about God's Word. Thanks.